Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I got a lot of political stuff to get through. How the left is, more prone to therapy and to mental illness diagnosis, something that Tucker Carlson alluded to, and then Tucker Carlson said something really stupid and, put his audience at risk. So I want to go through all that and just how the left has lost it and is still claiming victim consciousness, even though they hold all the power in Washington right now, right? And they're going after the Supreme Court. They have the two major bodies of legislative government, the executive office and the Congress and the Senate, and they're still claiming that the Republicans are, victimizing them. And so even in a post-Trump era. And I should also say here that Tucker Carlson, there was a time when he wanted to cancel truthers. Like he said it, and he had a disdain for truthers just back in 2012, so just 10 years ago. And I have a video of that as well. And I just wanted to start this off with this idea that when you use force, there's always a counter force. The more force you use, the more force that comes back at you. This is science and spiritual science. It is something that's one of the fundamental principles of the heartfulness system, because the transmission that's given, when you meditate in the heartfulness system, the transmission that you get, there is this energy that's given from heart to heart, and it is divine energy. It is God's love, and it's also called the forceless force, because it's energy, but in the most delicate and subtle. It's as subtle as it can be. God's love is the most subtle thing in the universe. And so what I'm talking about here is when you think about, like, for example, food is very gross compared to water. I mean, there's so many different varieties of food. Some of them are healthy. Some of them are less healthy. Some of them are toxic. Some of the things are basically borderline poisonous in our food system. You can live without food for maybe 30 days, right? And it's, the grossest of these things that you need to survive, right? Things that you need to survive. Then water, which is, of course, much purer, doesn't have a taste really, so it's not something where, it's as enjoyable as food. It's much more subtle, and your body can only survive without water for, 3 days, 4 days, right? Depending on where you are, the maximum of dehydration. So you constantly need water put into your system. Food, not as much, and food is grosser. Water is more subtle. And oxygen is even more subtle than water. It's more, refined. It's harder to even detect the air that we breathe. Water is, water's wet and you can see it, but it's clear and it doesn't have many distinguishable characteristics compared to food, which has all these different colors and all this. It's a more physically solid, and food has a lot more, in terms of the variety of foods, it has a lot more in terms of gross material. And water is more subtle, and then air, you can't even see at all, right? It's invisible, you can feel it if there's a breeze, and certainly you can't distinguish oxygen from the other components of things that you're breathing in. And you can only live with, a couple minutes, right? 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most. I mean, what's the longest somebody can hold their breath? And so each of these things is, more subtle than the other things. And then love, which is more subtle than air, more subtle than oxygen, is something that nobody can live without. Your physical body, your soul can't exist without God's love. It's the most subtle thing in the universe. And that's what's given in the heartfulness system in its purest, most refined form. And so it boosts people on a level, a spiritual level, but it boosts you on all levels because it's the fundamental building block of all of creation, divine love, the forceless force, the energy behind all of creation. And the second master of the system, Babaji, who, sort of perfected this transmission. It's something that was there, was something, the process that was used in ancient times, but he perfected it for modern times. And he was very, clear about not forbidding things to people and not using force in his in his teachings and things. And if people were sitting around him, he used to smoke a hookah, and people would come to his house, and he would transmit them. He would transmit to them, clean their hearts, and transmit to them. And if he had to correct somebody, if he had to, he saw something in somebody's character, he saw something he needed to correct, he wouldn't look at the person and lecture them. You have an anger problem, or you have a gambling problem, you got to stop gambling. He wouldn't say something like that. He would look at another person who was sitting with him, and he'd say, I have this story about how anger negatively affects people, or, how gambling blocks spirituality, right? He would say it in a very subtle way, not addressing the person directly, and hopefully they would, realize that what he was talking about, they had that problem, and so it was not always the case, but he did it in a very, without using force, right, where there would be a reaction. How people get defensive if you confront them, when you tell them, hey, stop doing this, a-hole, right? So that doesn't work, right? This doesn't work. It usually produces the opposite reaction. And so there's so much force on both sides, the left, the right, the truther community, everybody trying to force other people to, to their way of seeing things. And it doesn't work. It just drives the division further. And that's something that everybody needs to know, especially in the truth community. When you've been doing this for some time, you realize that most people have already made up their minds at which category and group they're a part of. And even though it might be a family member or a loved one, and you desperately want them to wake up, telling them about it, lecturing to them about it, giving them information about it doesn't work. It takes some time for people to realize this, and some people never realize this. There's people in the truth community that are staying doing the same stupid stuff, trying to force their beliefs on other people in their lives, and they're just driving people away, right? You have to, let people find their own path to the truth, whatever it is. And that goes for spiritual truth as well as anything else, right? I mean, people are, just because you say something to people, in fact, when you do say something about whatever, some belief, they're more likely to react negatively and have an oppositional attitude. We're very authority resistant in America. It's just, the Western culture. And it's become worse and worse. So people are more apt to go against something that is, lectured to them in a forceful way. So I needed to preface the video with this. This is sort of the introduction. And so let's get into what I'm talking about here. Okay, so let's start here. This is the front page of Huffington Post, the very liberal, Democratic Huffington Post. Florida 2 poised to pass voting crackdown. And then it says here, GOP group is rating Trump's response to Trump's attempt to overturn democracy. A radical right dream to rewrite the Constitution is close to coming true. How many false claims did Biden make in his first 100 days compared to Trump? It's not going to be as many, I think. Do you understand? This is their political leanings. And so we'll get into the Tucker Carlson thing in a moment. But if you look at the liberal-leaning media's response on a daily basis, they are claiming to be victims. The Democratic Party are claiming to be victims constantly. They're victims on every possible level, even though they control all the power. They have the presidency now. They have, the two major legislative branches of government. And they want to pack the Supreme Court with Democratic justices. They now can pass through all these justices, Biden-led justices. And so they want to add 4 Democratic justices, giving them the majority on the Supreme Court probably forever. And so this is, again, if you're saying Republicans are going to rewrite the Constitution, well, how are they going to do that when they have no, it's clearly the Democrats that are more trying to control what everybody else does. And I'm not a Republican. I've never voted Republican. I'm not a right-leaning person. My parents and family were mostly Democrats, and it's not like I have some Republican agenda here. It's clear that the Democrats are trying to control everything we say. I mean, just from my own experience, it isn't, you can bash the right pretty much all day long, on YouTube and Facebook and social media. But the liberals and the Democrats, they're, a lot of protected groups in these, and that's all coming from the left, right? And so, in terms of suppression of freedom of speech, that's coming from the left. It used to come from the right when I was a kid. It used to be a Christian coalition, but now it's coming from the left. The left seems to have all the power when it comes to controlling you on every possible level, and all the stuff to do with COVID and things that are, clearly unconstitutional came from the left, and the, sort of the medical, and you have this, the religion of science, right? Christian religion used to have a lot of influence over society and social issues, but now it's the religion of science. So if you're saying that the Republicans are trying to rewrite the Constitution, and you're literally trying to pack the courts, because that's what's going to happen here, to gain control of the judicial wing of the government, that's effed up, right? That's, completely using force, like I said. And not that the Republicans don't use force, but the Democrats have much more power. They have all the media, because Fox News has completely been, denutted, right? Not that I like Fox News or ever liked Fox News, but Fox News has been, you see what they're doing here with Tucker Carlson. They'll get to this in just a moment. But it says, Tucker Carlson condemned after urging viewers to harass strangers wearing masks. There's a daily Tucker Carlson headline here on Huffington Post and these liberal-leaning websites that are calling for his being silenced, calling for him to be canceled, and other people like them. But there was a time when Tucker Carlson verbalized wanting to cancel the truth community. He thought truthers should be silent. So, he's changed his tune a little bit, but this has been part and parcel to the people that are on television, the media, and political people. They love to silence opposing voices. So going back to this idea, Florida Senate passes bill restricting voting rights. Well, see what happened here, and if people were being honest, you're not supposed to, talk about what happened in the election. You're not supposed to say that, there was any possible impropriety. But what happened was they changed the electoral process at the last minute, months before, and most states didn't really have a plan, by introducing absentee ballots, mail-in ballots on a level that we've never seen before. And that favored Biden. You can't say it didn't favor Biden, because on election night, Trump was winning in all of these states. He had technically won the election at that point, but there were all these absentee and mail-in ballots to count, and those mail-in ballots were the difference in the election. Now, I'm not saying that I know for sure that bad things happened with the mail-in ballots, that the election was stolen from Trump or any of these things. I'm not saying that because I don't know. But you would have to think that everything would have had to go perfectly, in a last-minute change to the electoral process, to say without a shadow of a doubt there was no problem. And that was the message we got from mainstream media and the political people on both sides. The Republican and Democratic establishment all said basically the thing went off without a hitch, right? And everything was fine. There was absolutely no reason to investigate, no reason to look into this, because it went off seamlessly, and there wasn't even a chance that some, cheating was done, right? That's what the message was, that in a world full of cheaters and cheating, that this, change in the electoral process produced perfect results, right? Like, that's what we were told. And so, again, I don't know, maybe there was enough votes for Biden. I don't know. I don't know. Nobody really does, because it wasn't investigated. But the official story was, it was a perfect election, right? No problems, no issues at all. And so when you change something as big as this election was, 2 months, you change the rules, right? They changed the electoral rules in all these states to accommodate more mail-in ballots. And you're going to say that went seamlessly. There wasn't any issue, because cheating happens. Americans cheat, right? Your athletes cheat. I mean, you can see in sports all the ways that athletes cheat. And so the left and the right are always trying to cheat in terms of voting. They're always trying to rig gerrymander the districts and rig the elections in their favor. I mean, that's how politics works. It's not about, the best person winning, right? I mean, like, just think about that. You think politics is about the best person winning? The best people aren't even running for office. You have a bunch of scumbags on both sides running for power, lifelong politicians like this guy. But Trump was no treat, right? And his, who he was as a person. These aren't the best people. They're narcissistic, power hungry, I mean, they're controlled and in some cases, heartless people, right? Governor Gavin Newsom, that clown. I mean, think about all the politicians. How many of them do you consider good people? Like the salt of the earth good people. So it's not about the best people, the most moral, the most evolved getting elected. It's about, like the best of the worst, right? It's about finding the best of the worst and voting for them. Because there's very few inspirational candidates out there. I know there's a lot of Trump lovers, but if you really looked at Trump as who he was in terms of his character qualities, he's not a good person. And so in this, this idea that only one side is trying to cheat, right? And so now that's about them. The Republicans went along with getting rid of Trump, and they didn't investigate any of the stuff to do with absentee ballots. And maybe we'll never know exactly if there were any real issues there. And Trump's legal team didn't help matters by his ridiculous, appointment of Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and his melting face, right? I mean, his legal team was a nightmare, and they made a lot of claims that couldn't be backed up, which just added to the problem. But, there probably was some significant issues just based in introducing something new at the last minute in a very contentious election. And the Republicans chose not to investigate any of those improprieties. And so now the Republicans realize if they don't do something, then the next election they'll have no chance of anything, right? If they don't clamp down on some of the, the discrepancies in what happened in 2020, then they're out, right? They'll no longer have power. And so the Democrats are claiming victim, even though, I think deep down they know by rigging the courts and all these things that they're trying to control something that shouldn't be controlled. So let's go to this Tucker Carlson thing. So first, Tucker Carlson said something that I wasn't aware of, but it makes total sense. And it's important to understand some of the things that are going on in the world. And then he says something really stupid. And, he's setting his audience up for doing bad things.
A Pew survey from last March found that 64% of white Americans who classify themselves as liberal or very liberal have been diagnosed with an actual mental health condition.
So this is interesting because I never thought about this myself, but they did this study. And you can see here, it makes total sense. Psychologists are known for being liberal, but is that because they understand how people think? Well, no, because, I have a master's in counseling. And I went to a very liberal school to get in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where it was a highly liberal place. And it is a profession that people who are liberal will more than likely go into. And most people who are liberal, who are Democrats, are more likely to go into therapy. Like all these Hollywood celebrities go into therapy, right? They got therapists, maybe 2 or 3 therapists, right? And they're constantly in therapy. And, they all have been diagnosed with something. And so this is from BuzzFeed, which is a liberal publication, what your politics say about your mental health. So post-traumatic stress disorder, Democrats are twice as likely to experience that. ADHD, they're 3 times as likely to be ADHD. They are, in terms of anxiety, twice as likely to have anxiety. They are... to have depression, they're about 1/3 more likely to be depressed. And then you can see on this every level of OCD, which is a control disorder, right? All these things. Let me make this bigger here. All of these things, they are dyslexia. Republicans are, which is interesting because I'm dyslexic. But in pretty much every one of these things, Democrats are much more likely to have been diagnosed with this. But they're more likely to go to therapy, and they're more likely to trust the therapist. But think about that. These are people who admittedly have a difficult time coping, right, with life. They have a lot of psychological issues. Many of them are on psychological medication. And that doesn't mean that they are, again, they're more likely to go to therapy to cope, where Republicans are more likely to, pretend they don't have any issues, right? And so, there's that. But if they have all these conditions, Republicans report much better mental health than others. And again, this is a Gallup poll. This comes from Gallup here. And so this is something where if you are admittedly having mental health issues, then why do you, and as a group you have a lot more mental health issues, then why do you think you're so superior to the Republicans, right? Because that's what Democrats think. They think they're, better educated, they're just smarter and more evolved, and they're more progressive, and if, they ran the world would be a better place. Republicans think the same thing. They're both wrong. The system can't be fixed, and I've talked about this before. It's a bad system. The system makes you crazy. Because if you go into therapy, you can be diagnosed with something. In fact, to get insurance billing, right, to get Medicaid or your insurance company to pay for your sessions, the therapist has to come up with a diagnosis for you. And so the best diagnosis is like some sort of, I think it's called adjustment disorder. And that means that you're experiencing some sort of stress or some sort of whatever it is, right? Like in your life, it's a circumstantial thing you're experiencing. And so it doesn't mean that you have a condition. But if you get diagnosed with manic depression or some sort of personality disorder, that's on your permanent record, and that shit ain't going away, right? Like that's there. You have that, for the rest of your life, according to the therapy. And pretty soon everyone's going to know it, right? It's going to be something where you go to a job and they know your psychological issues, and it's going to prevent them or it's going to deter them from hiring you or whatever it is. And so this is, the modern day psychological movement. But therapy itself is looking for problems. And I've talked about that before. It's why it doesn't work. It's why I don't do that job. In the heartfulness system, which is a spiritual system, it looks for the solution. It looks for your soul to get your soul to emerge out and your divinity that's within you and clear away all the stuff that's, there's a cleaning system to clean away all the things that block the best part of you, right? The best version of you from coming out. And so it's focused on the goal, and it's focused on what's best in you, that you have a soul and you have a spiritual essence, and to maximize that, minimize your ego and maximize that. But in therapy, it looks for problems, just like the medical community, the allopathic medical community, looks for symptoms, looks for medical conditions, and treats the condition. It doesn't boost the health. It doesn't boost your immune system. It doesn't look to support your health. It looks to go after the medical condition. Same thing in psychology. It's problem centered. Like all you do is discuss your problems or what's wrong. You focus on the problems. I talk about there was a solution focused when I was getting my master's degree in counseling. This woman came in and she was like great, like everybody just loved her, and she did solution focused therapy. She gave a talk to one of my classes. And she said, she said a bunch of funny stuff, but she said, she was doing therapy for a while and just discussing the problems day in and day out, people whining about their problems and all these things. And she said she felt miserable. And then she came upon solution-focused therapy. And I read a couple of books on solution-focused therapy. And, there was a great example given about a hitter. I've talked about this before. He was in a slump, a baseball hitter. He wasn't hitting the ball. And so one of his managers said after like a month or two, said, what are you doing? He said, well, I've been watching a lot of tape of my swing. And he said, and his manager said, your swing when you've been in the slump? And he said, yeah, because he wanted to figure out what he was doing wrong and correct it. And he said, why are you watching the swing when you're not hitting? Why don't you go back to a couple months ago when you were hitting the ball well and look at that and replicate that? And the hitter did that, and he came out of his slump. And that's solution-focused therapy. In solution-focused therapy, you spend the first 2 sessions discussing the problem. The rest is about finding a solution. And the therapist and you work together to find solutions, which the woman said was so much more gratifying. And she said, if someone said, does it work with people with personality disorders? because personality disorders, the borderline and the narcissistic personality disorder, by and large, are the people, the group that therapists dislike working with. And she said something like really hilarious. She said, I can only take one or two of them on at a time. And she goes, I can smell them coming. I hear their, I hear their message on the answering machine. I just know, what it's going to be like. And so, I only take a couple of them on at a time. I'm going to charge them for every second of my time that they are inevitably going to waste. I was dealing with people with a personality disorder, and so I knew right what she was talking about, because they're just they just suck the life out of you. So you understand this. We live in a problem-centered system. Everything's about the problems. You go to a doctor because you have a problem. You go to a psychologist because you have a problem. They focus on the problem. The medicine they give you gives you more problems, whatever it is. The psychological treatment they give you gives you more problems. Very little is about solutions. Politicians talk to you about your problems. They make promises they can't keep, and they blame the other guy, like in Trump's case. And so it's all about problems. You watch the news, it's problem, 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 right? And so, this weighs down on people. It's very forceful, like I was talking about earlier. And so, this is where the left is coming from. And the one thing to know about psychology, it's never the system's fault. And the same thing about the allopathic medicine. It's never the psychological system. It's never the overall system that I call the beast, right? They can diagnose everybody with a psychological condition, but it's your fault because this is a great system and you can't live in it, right? The system is great, but you're the problem. They never say it's the system, a systemic problem. And so it is. The system sucks, and it's making everybody crazy. It's a pleasure-based, materialistic-based, debt-based, disconnecting people from God, nature, and family-based system. And the repercussions is that everybody sucks, right? We live in a society where everybody sucks because the system sucks, and it's making people more sucky. And we're manifesting this system, and we're sucky, so we're creating a sucky system, which is getting suckier because the system sucks, and people get suckier, so they manifest an even suckier system. And so that's that's all paths lead to suck. One group that talks quite often about being in therapy and seems to be perpetually in therapy. I mean, it's wealthy people, but it is, celebrities as a whole. They are, very, it's sort of a badge of honor to have a psychological condition and to be in therapy. And so you have all these celebrities that talk about therapy, who are open to therapy, and it's a group of people. It's a economic class. It's it's educated people, and there's people who are in therapy for basically ever, right? So imagine if you went to your gas station and they were saying, bring your car back once a week for 35 years, right? Imagine anything getting fixed, even in terms of, medical issues, where they said, well, you're going to do this for 35 years. You're going to be in one form of therapy or another, and, it's never going away. Well, that doesn't work, right? The therapeutic model doesn't work if you're constantly in therapy. I mean, it's something that everyone should think about because, this is the broken class. I've talked about the year of the broken, and they're saying it's okay to be broken. Why is it okay to be broken? Like, these are all celebrities that have talked about therapy, and they're all into therapy. They have, like I said, multiple therapists sometimes, and they're broken people. And they're the ones who think they know more than the non-broken people. And again, everyone's broken somewhat because of the system. But think about that, right? That you have this, group of people who is, remember this, I did a video on this where Katy Perry had this very, just a weird therapeutic session on YouTube. And so again, I'm not saying you shouldn't seek help. I'm just saying the therapeutic model has proven to be not effective. Like I, again, have a master's degree in counseling, and I worked in the counseling system, and I've seen how it works on certainly the lower levels of society, as well as these sort of, dry out centers or treatment centers. And it therapy doesn't really work, right? I mean, it works somewhat. There's people, who have success. I went to therapy for a while and I had some good things come out of it, but it was the heartfulness system that helped me get over my issues or whatever they were, in terms of, not just like certain issues, but everything, like, things that have come up since then, everything that is in there in my internal system, the heartfulness system helps to clean out and helps you to, become a better person, work on your internal world, where the therapeutic model is just like our allopathic model that addresses the symptoms, like I said before. And so when you look into, the world of celebrities who are out there pitching these, I did this other video you can find on my apocalaughsnow channel where Joe Rogan and this comedian were talking about how all these celebrities, they're mean people, cruel people. They have spazzes over small things, and yet they're out there pretending to be, they're activists. They're what I call fake-tivists. And so this group of broken people who is just focused on their own brand and their own egos shouldn't be out there, Kanye, shouldn't be out there telling people how they should live, right? The broken can't lead people who are less broken or not broken at all. See, the two sides of the paradigm, the left and the right, both are a part of the same dysfunctional system, which I call the beast. And so therapy is a part of that system. It's a part of helping people function within that system, but never getting to the real issue, which is the system is making us all worse. So therapy can help you to some extent, but only to cope with a dysfunctional system. They're never changing the problem. Like the problem is, the system. And so we have a problem-centered healing because they're never addressing that the system needs to change. And it's going to change, but that, we're all dependent, 100% dependent on a system that is on the verge of collapsing. And I talk about this quite often. So let's come back to this. Let's go back to Tucker Carlson. I'll come back to this stuff with celebrities and all these, the therapeutic model in a second. But let's finish up this Tucker Carlson thing.
If you dare to go on foot from Union Station to the Capitol, for example, in Washington without wearing a mask, angry Biden voters will snort at you in judgment. How could you? They're saying from behind the gauze.
So this has to do with Fauci coming out and saying you no longer have to wear a mask outdoors, which is something I said at the beginning. Didn't make any sense because, you're outdoors, right? But, now they're finally admitting it. They're changed their story so much. And what he's saying is that their behavior, so that's their behavior, right? What he's calling, the enemy, the left, right? Biden voters, that when non-maskers walk through Washington, D.C., Biden voters and Democrats will harass them and say, how dare you not wear a mask? So that's their behavior, right? And here comes Carlson's solution, his immature solution.
The rest of us should be snorting at them first. They're the aggressors. It's our job to brush them back and restore the society we were born in.
No, it's not. Like, again, this is bad advice. And Tucker's is a newbie, right? He's starting to be, slightly a truther. Of course, he's working for Fox. He's part of the establishment. He's dabbling in truth, but he's a newbie. And I'll get back to this in just a moment.
So the next time you see someone in a mask on the sidewalk or on the bike path, do not hesitate. Ask politely but firmly, would you please take off your mask? Science shows there is no reason for you to be wearing it.
So this is really bad advice, and it is, counterproductive, because he's just talking about how the left is mentally ill. He just did a bit about the left having all these diagnoses, mentally ill diagnoses, and he talks about the left being unhinged all the time, irrational and unreasonable. And the left talks about the right being stupid and irrational and crazy and Trumpers, right? And that's how both sides feel about each other. If you think the other side is crazy and unhinged and stupid and, the way that you feel about the oppositional side, if you think that they're worth hating and so many people hate the other side, why would you think it's a good idea to go up to them and confront them about mask wearing? Whether, in either side, whether you're a left person saying you should wear a mask to somebody, or you're a right-wing person saying you shouldn't. I'm not talking about somebody who has to work at a store and their job is to tell people to put on masks because they're, just doing whatever job and the part of the whatever system they're a part of, right? I'm talking about citizens against citizens who go up to a stranger and say, stop doing that thing that you think is good, right? Or do the thing that you think is bad. Do you think this unreasonable person that you dislike and you have all these negative feelings for, crazy, all the things that you can think about the opposition, do you think that person's going to say, oh, yeah, you're right, tell me more, please, person who I believe is crazy and stupid and unhinged, right? I mean, he covers the division all the time. And so what you're looking for is a fight. That's the only reason to say something. You want to be, a Karen. You're going to end up on, video somewhere, right? You're going to end up, or in some kind of altercation. It could escalate or whatever it is. And so this is the actions of a newbie. I'm not saying Tucker Carlson's a truther, but he is, flirted with the truth, and I'll come back to this point. But there was a time not so long ago where Tucker Carlson was saying that people in the truth community, people like me and you, many of you, people like me certainly back then, should be canceled. He wanted me and other people canceled, and he was very, adamant about it. So this is something from 2012 where Tucker Carlson was interviewed by that guy, Adam versus the Man. And he was asked about a big event that happened in 2001. And this is what he said.
I believe anything if there's evidence, but there isn't any. So knock it off. That's my view.
So first he says, knock it off. And there was a ton of evidence. I mean, there's so much evidence to this specific issue. You can't see it anymore. It's, a banned subject. But back then, we were all covering this event. He was telling us all to knock it off. So that was part of him. That was the beginning. He says something even more damning about wanting to cancel all of us. But he was saying there was no evidence and there was a lot. He just didn't want to see it or hear it. He was at a Ron Paul event and he was, talking about this fringe group, that fringe, what was considered a fringe group, but wasn't really. And now, he's catering to people like that, right? He's changed his tune.
I hate that. And by the way, I am open to almost any crackpot theory about anything. It's just on that subject, come on. You know what I mean? That's too much. That even for me.
He's open to up to any crackpot theory on any subject, but, now he's changed his tune. You understand this. But he was part of the establishment, and that this is where he was back in 2012.
This is a no-win conversation, so I'm not going to continue it. But my macro view is the obvious one, which is the buildings came down because a bunch of nutcases flew a plane into them.
Okay, so are you still supporting Ron Paul?
I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm supporting Ron Paul. I like Ron Paul. I've always liked Ron Paul.
So, are you supporting anybody in the race this year?
No, I don't support. I don't even.
You're
vote
an objective
someone.
journalist.
I don't even vote. I'm hardly objective. I'm honest. I'm not objective.
Certainly not afraid to speak your mind.
No, I'm not. No, you can assess my views are very clear. No, I'm not. No, you can assess my views are very clear.
You have any
but
message?
I hate that 11 crap. Wish they just kick those people out. Wish they just kick those people out. Wish they just kick those people out.
So what do you mean kick them out?
I don't know. Whatever.
He tried to walk it back, right? He realized he spoke what back then would have not been considered cancel culture, but that's what he was saying. That people who believed in this, so-called beep truth thing, right? This I self-beeped, this truth movement that was happening back then, and I was among them. I had made videos about this, and and I was at a different stage of my own development and dealing with all these things, right? But he was saying that people like me should be kicked out. People like me should be canceled. And so now he has gone in a different direction, and he's, evolved to some extent. But he once believed in cancel culture, like everybody does at some point or another. People trying to cancel other people's beliefs. And once you open Pandora's box, then you can be canceled, right? You understand this? Once you use a weapon, that weapon then can be used against you. I mean, that's how life works. That's how the spiritual cycle works. Once you've picked up a weapon, then that weapon can be used against you. And so that's part of what's happening with everybody, because there's people in the truth community that want to cancel other people and cancel other people in the truth community who believe differently than them. And there was the whole QBs that wanted to cancel everybody. But Tucker Carlson is a newbie. If he is, at least partially a truther, and I think that he believes in a lot of the things that he says on his show, then he's starting to flirt with the truth community. But he doesn't know what he's talking about when he says, go confront people that he calls crazy and tell them to stop wearing masks, even though they hate you and they think you're crazy, right? So I sort of exhumed the word ghoul, and I'll talk about this is significant in a lot of different ways. And it's not like some badge of honor, but it started to be used after I, started using it here. And Tucker Carlson used it, and there's various people that sent that clip to me of him using it, saying that he must watch my show, and I don't, know if that's the case, but someone on his staff probably does, or somehow, this idea of ghoul is so important to, everything I'm about to say about this. It's this idea, I've been watching this show with my wife, the 12 Monkeys, and I made a long video because there was this message in the show that had specifically to do with my daughter Anna's passing. It was and I made a long video about it, and it had a copyright issue which got resolved with the 12 Monkeys people, and I just am waiting for the right time to post it, but it's kind of an epic video. But anyways, in this show, which is an excellent show, I didn't know, I had watched a little part of it before and didn't understand it, and but I like, time travel shows, and I like shows that are science fiction in nature, and it's about a plague, a pandemic that wipes out 7 billion people, 7/8 of the population, in 2014 or 15 when the show was on, right? And so it is a prequel to what's happening now, and they're using time travel to deal with it. It's based in the 12 Monkeys movie, which is very good. Has a lot of truther stuff in that as well. I did a video on that. And so the show is well done. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because there's a line from both the movie and the show where the physicist is sending back the main character, the protagonist of the story, and she says to him, remember, everyone that you meet is already dead, right? That you're going back to the past right before the pandemic, and all these people are going to die. And you can do nothing to save them. You can't change their destiny. You can't affect any of those things. You should look at them as corpses. And I think that's good advice for everything that's going on now in terms of all these ghouls walking around. People who, either were right or were wrong, right? Either we're right or we're wrong about what's really going on here in terms of the establishment. And to have faith in ourselves and whatever it is, the path that we're on. Because if we're wrong, great. If we're wrong, then things can change and the world will get better, whatever it might be. And so we're all betting on our ability to decipher what's going on right now, right? All of us in the truth community, but people who are sheeple, who are clinging to the beast and the system, thinking the system's going to save them, and Fauci and the establishment is going to save them. They're betting on that, right? They're betting their lives and their future and their kids' lives and all of this on trusting the system and that these people wouldn't lie to them and all the rest of it, right? And we're betting our health and our well-being on what we believe. And so there's no reason for us to be hostile with the other group. Everyone's got the ability to decipher their own information, right? And they all can make their choices. And you should know by now, again, I'm talking about Tucker Carlson, he's a newbie. For him to say, go confront people with masks, it's irresponsible to his audience. It's irresponsible to the people who are following him because they are looking to him for guidance, and it's just something that will never end well. Everyone should know this, right? As you move along with this, as you move forward, you should realize that this idea of waking everybody up is never going to happen, right? You're not going to wake everybody up the way that you should think they should be awoken. And, there's different levels of consciousness, the rise of consciousness, the moving your consciousness forward. And most people in the truth movement haven't had much elevation in terms of changing themselves and their grasp of reality and how they approach things, right? Have you changed inside, or are you just the same person with new information? Because most people are just the same people with new information. They're inflexible. They can't go inside and change themselves and their character qualities. They can't adapt. They can't use the information to realize what they need to change about themselves. They just change the information. They change their programming. It's like they're taking one bit of software out and replacing, but they're the same machine, right? You have to change internally, right? Are you confronting your religious indoctrination and the things that you grew up with, and your own political indoctrination? Because the people on the right who are just using this to demonize the Democrats and the lefties aren't getting it either. There's a left-right paradigm. And so, I've said this over and over again. It's a bad system. It's a materialistic system that takes people in the wrong direction. It's making us all worse and weaker, and the system has to come down. And the system has been, and the spiritual beings, that are assigned by God to orchestrate the evolution of this planet are clearly moving us in a new direction. It has to happen. And again, it's being done in a gentle way. I mean, going back to the Tucker Carlson thing and what I said originally at the beginning of this video, you're using force. If you go up to somebody and tell them not to wear a mask, you're using force, right? You're using, it's social interaction where you're telling somebody that what they're doing is wrong and they don't know what they're doing and you know more than them. And, can you take off your mask? Even if you do it in a polite way, it's going to create a counterforce. And there's already that counterforce between the left and the right. And so in terms of, the heartfulness meditation, that is a system that's here to bring people to the next phase, right? The next, phase in human evolution, where people are more spiritual in nature and have a deeper internalized connection with God and are capable of handling a lot more truth and understanding about the origin of our species and our true spiritual purpose here. And so that's there. And that's something that I'm betting on, right? You might not be able to, you don't feel it, right? You might try the system or listen to me say that, and you don't really feel it, you don't believe in it. And so that's, you have to find your own path. But for me, I found my path and I feel confident in, my choice, right? But everyone's got to make one. You got to trust something. You got to, you got to hook into something. This is a time of an epic, and you just can't sit there and, sit on your hands and, complain. And, you can do that. I mean, I guess that's a choice in itself. But, things are changing. You have to grab onto something, and everybody has to figure that out for himself, what they believe in. What do you truly have faith in? What do you believe in? And then just stick with that and be happy with that. And don't worry about the people that believe the opposite or believe in something else, because that's what everybody, if you're so secure in your own beliefs and your own faith and what your system and what you're doing and your choices that you're making, then, why do other people making different choices bother you? I mean this about the left, the right, everybody. If they're wrong, you're going to see it, right? It'll be there for everybody to see. You'll know it. You'll get some validation at the end of this thing. But everything's just right now, it's a leap of faith. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.